Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Peter Chan, coming to you from the National Weather Service on this Easter Sunday, April 9th, 2023. And if you'd like additional weather information on top of what I give you in this broadcast, you can go to weather.gov. That's the National Weather Service's online presence. If you go online and at this site, you can point and click anywhere on this map of the continental U.S. or Alaska and Hawaii at the lower left. It'll bring you up a forecast along with any relevant watches, warnings, or advisories. A great way to check up on the weather in different parts of the country, especially where friends and relatives live. On the weather map this Sunday afternoon, cold temperatures in the mid-Atlantic, anticipating frost freezing temperatures in the mid-Atlantic back toward the central Appalachians into eastern Kentucky. We have flood outlooks for spring snowmelt flooding in the northern Rockies and northern Great Lakes, and then actual flood watches in the mountains of especially northeastern Nevada and up here in areas of northeastern Washington state. Here in Alaska on this Easter Sunday, it's been very wintry. Blizzard conditions reported in the eastern Kenai, west end of Prince William Sound, especially around Portage Valley and Whittier. Snows will continue there with blowing and drifting in through this evening. Additional snowfall could occur in the Anchorage Bowl and across areas of the eastern interior, though it will be certainly lighter than the snow they're getting there along the eastern Kenai. Continued very cold over the northwestern mainland through this early upcoming week. Some record temperatures there since late last week, since Friday morning. A number of spots have had temperatures as cold or a bit below 30 below zero. That could be repeated again early Monday morning. Near to below normal temperatures is still the rule here going through mid-April. We may see little modifications here or there, but overall, don't look for any big warm-ups that would lead toward rapid snowmelt or any type of river breakup anytime soon. Selawik, mostly clear this Sunday afternoon, 13 below, 32 below. That was the state's one of the coldest temperatures recorded in the state this Easter Sunday morning. Eagle reporting periods of light snow, additional light snow there. They picked up about 3 inches of snow since Saturday morning. And an additional 1 to 3 inches of snow could fall in the east central interior tonight through Monday. Temperature there 19 early this afternoon. Look at Whittier, blizzard conditions. They've had winds gusting up around 40 miles an hour. Some very heavy snow, and that heavy snow will continue into the evening hours. Sitka is reporting periods of rain and light fog with a temperature at 42. And looking at the current advisories and warnings of greatest note, the blizzard warning here for the western Prince William Sound, eastern Kenai, particularly there Portage Valley and around Whittier. So that travel along the Seward Highway, especially through Turnagain Arm Pass and as Moose Pass, those areas there could have some heavier snow as well. Snow is going to back up into the Anchorage area with some additional snowfall on the lighter side this evening, and then a broad area of light snow from the southeast side of the Brooks Range, from Arctic Village through the Yukon Flats, down through Central, Eagle, and Northway, maybe another 1 to 3 inches of snow. Also on the backside of the storm in the Gulf, we have brisk northwest winds, and it's causing volcanic ash to be resuspended from the Katmai Nova Rupta volcanic eruption that occurred back in 1912. It's going to impact Karluk, Larsen Bay, and AKwx as we go through tonight and during the morning and early afternoon on Monday. On the satellite imagery, we can see the moisture that's pulled back here into Prince William Sound across south central eastern Kenai. That's associated with that low there. There's another little area of low pressure that's enhancing the rain and snow along the Panhandle and British Columbia coasts. And then further north, the really cold air remains entrenched here across the lower Chukchi Sea, the northwest quadrant of the mainland. Behind me, the next weather system moving up along the Kamchatka coast, an area of low pressure with a front arcing ahead of it that's going to push across the lower Bering Sea, the Aleutian chain, and then eventually up into the southwest coast. The lower YK Delta and Bristol Bay will be picking up some light snow as we go into especially Monday night and Tuesday morning. So here is the low this Sunday afternoon. That's responsible for the blizzard conditions there at Whittier. And we have a secondary impulse that's rotating upward this way. It's going to enhance some of the rain and snow there and through the Panhandle. And then this trough is what's keeping the periods of light snow going on here across the east central interior along the Alcan border. And then the cold air just sitting here where you have clearer skies. Some of these areas in the northwest interior could see temperatures again down around 30 below zero come Monday morning. And then on later tonight into Monday, low that's out over the western Gulf is going to begin to pivot back toward the south and east. Still some patchy light snow across the east central interior. And then behind me, the next system marches eastward. By Monday afternoon, we have frontal system working its way through the central eastern Aleutians, pushing up into the Alaska Peninsula. And as this front moves into the southwest coast, we expect some light snow breaking out, especially for Monday evening through Monday night and Tuesday morning. The YK deltas down through Bristol Bay and the northern portion of the Alaska Peninsula. And by Tuesday, that snow will spread further eastward into south central. There could even be some additional light accumulations up through the western Kenai, Anchorage Bowl, Mat-Su valleys as a result of this system. And the colder air in the north will slide eastward a little bit. It will modify slightly as well. Coming up here, the temperatures I'll show you. Lows generally above freezing across the Panhandle tonight. Back here to the west, though, very cold on the other side of the Alaska Range, 24 below at McGrath. McGrath set record lows late last week on Friday. So again, this is very cold air mass that's in place. Temperatures Monday afternoon will modify into the low 40s and through the Panhandle, maybe even 48 with a little downslope there at Skagway. But generally staying below freezing across most of south central. Lows Tuesday morning, not quite as cold through this area. But a bit below freezing expected across the Panhandle, and temperatures Tuesday afternoon should be back up in the 40s, even some upper 40s at Ketchikan and Craig, and then back here, even getting back up maybe a little above freezing from Talkeetna, Anchorage down into Kenai and Soldotna. And temperatures in the far north could be 30 below in some spots here of the northwest and west central interior Monday morning. As we go into Monday afternoon, generally single digits above or below zero in the northwest, getting up in just around 10 to 15 degrees along the Yukon River. And lows Tuesday morning still quite cold. Still could be an isolated 30 degree below reading up in this region Tuesday morning. And then Tuesday afternoon, single digits generally above zero across the north and northwest, and back up into the 10 to 15 degree range along the Yukon River. In through the northwest or southwest interior, coldest temperatures as you go up the Yukon River, the upper Kuskokwim toward McGrath and say Galena. Those areas there down around 25 below. Temperatures above freezing as you get out into the Aleutians. And Monday afternoon temperatures will only be in the teens for highs along the Kuskokwim River. Areas back here toward the west, maybe as warm as 47 at Dutch Harbor. And for Tuesday morning, temperatures modify a bit. We are going to have that frontal system pushing in from the southwest, so thickening cloud cover and some light snow. We do anticipate temperatures Tuesday afternoon should get back up around freezing along areas of Kuskokwim Bay up toward maybe as we get toward Bethel, and then a little above freezing once you get out toward King Salmon, and then certainly southwestward into the lower 40s across the Alaska Peninsula. If we take a look at the extended temperature outlook for April 15th through the 19th, as we're just getting past mid-month, it looks like the greatest chance for below normal temperatures will be across the southwestern quadrant of the mainland, with the greatest focus around Bethel and Dillingham, so pretty cold air residing here across the southwest interior. We do also anticipate it's going to be a drier air mass, so that means clear skies, cold nights and early mornings, so below normal precipitation expected in the west around and just past mid-month. Precipitation may average a little above normal, eastern mainland especially focused here along the Alcan border, and then extending southeastward down across areas of the Panhandle, but at this point not looking to be excessive in any way.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, it's now time for your aviation weather. If you have a flight planned either this Monday or Tuesday, we have a couple areas of weakening low pressure in the Gulf. One that'll start out early Monday morning in the western Gulf and then just kind of swing back down toward the south and east. Another little weak impulse will occur in the vicinity of AKwx, kind of come up and then loop back around. We expect widespread IFR conditions along areas of the Panhandle early Monday morning into the northeastern Gulf Coast, also across the eastern interior along the Alcan border, extending all the way up along the North Slope and Arctic coast. IFR conditions are expected to be rather extensive there. And then with this frontal system that is working its way east-northeastward, we expect a broad area of IFR conditions from the tip of the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutians, back out through the central Bering Sea. And for Monday afternoon, conditions should improve a bit, at least MVFR across much of the Panhandle and northeastern Gulf. Still areas, though, of IFR along the Arctic coast, Utqiagvik through Kaktovik, as well as the eastern third of the North Slope, and then a broad area of IFR conditions over the central Bering Sea through St. Paul and down here into areas along the southern portion of the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians. And by Tuesday morning, we expect this front to be pushing up toward the southwestern coast there of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays and along the Alaska Peninsula. And again, rather extensive IFR conditions anticipated along the Arctic coast from around Point Lay, Wainwright, up through Utqiagvik to Kaktovik. There's a trough that's just kind of sitting over this region of the Beaufort Sea, causing those IFR conditions. And by Tuesday afternoon, pockets of IFR anticipated along the central western Alaska range into parts of the interior there, southwest, and then along the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound. IFR conditions will start out Monday morning at Anaktuvik, giving way to MVFR. Same thing at Adigan Pass, IFR early, giving way to MVFR. Further south and west, the west arm of the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill VFR, Rainy Pass MVFR becoming VFR, Windy Pass in the central Alaska Range should generally see MVFR conditions hold. Isabel also MVFR conditions, and also in the far east, Mentasta generally MVFR conditions, though if you fly north of the north entrance, you'll encounter IFR there along the Alcan border, upper Tanana Valley. Further south and west, Tanita Pass MVFR on Monday, and Portage should also hold to marginal visual flight rules during the day Monday. Chilkoot and White could start out with IFR early in the morning, giving way to MVFR later in the morning and for the afternoon. Freezing levels at the surface extend out over the central Bering, dip down between the eastern Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula, and then well south of there has been a push of colder air with that northwesterly flow into the North Pacific Western Gulf area, and then the freezing line at the surface comes up into the inner channels of the Panhandle. Behind me, you can see the bump in freezing levels aloft associated with that frontal system that'll be working its way eastward through the Aleutians and the lower Bering Sea. We have freezing levels aloft of 6,000 feet across the central Aleutians and upwards of 8,000 feet south of there. Greatest threat for icing on Monday will be along this frontal system above 3,000 feet there on the cooler end, down toward the south where there's a little warmer air, especially to the north there of the eastern Aleutians. We expect freezing levels above 6,000 feet where there could be some considerable moderate icing. Back here, some pockets isolated 2,000 along the Alcan border and generally above 3 to near 5,000 feet as you go from the Panhandle down into the southeastern Gulf, North Pacific. Upper level jet stream winds, we have a jet core here coming down across the southwest into the North Pacific, and then another broad band of winds upwards of 125 knots south of the central Aleutians. 700 millibars, couple low circulations. This is the pocket of colder air sitting here in the northwest part of the state, weakening low circulation at 9,000 feet there over the Gulf. And then as I bring it down to 3,000 feet, we have a couple weak low circulations from AKwx back toward the central Gulf. Low still up there toward Utqiagvik, and then back to the west. Here's the low off the Kamchatka coast with the front arcing ahead of it and passing through at least the central and eastern Aleutians. Now, what does that mean for any type of turbulence? Greatest threat, turbulence on Monday, surface to 6,000 feet from around the entrance of Cook Inlet down across Kodiak Island, surface to 4,000 feet, and then areas of moderate turbulence extending out through the eastern central Aleutians, generally from the surface to 3,000 feet. So again, areas mainly of the southwest and the Alaska Peninsula affected by turbulence.
So that Galena flood back in 2013 was at the intersection of weather and climate. Rick, I often get questions about the difference between weather and climate. How do you distinguish between the two?
Well, that's a really good question, John. One of the analogies that I like to use, the wardrobe analogy. So in my closet, in my dresser, I've got clothes appropriate for 90-degree weather and 50 below weather. That's the climate part of my wardrobe. But what I'm going to put on today, am I going to wear my Hawaiian shirt because it's going to be a hot July day, or am I going to wear my bunny boots because it's going to be 50 below? That's the weather part of my wardrobe.
You know, there's another interesting analogy. I've heard it said that climate is like your personality, whereas weather is like the mood you're in today. It's like that old John Denver song. Some days are diamonds and some days are stones. That's how weather works.
Of course, it's really a continuous range. Just as the Galena ice jam flooding was the result of a weather event, that ice jam, up against that cold spring, a climate event. So too with less impactful events. For instance, a daily record high temperature is a weather event, one day's high. But we put that in a climate context, say comparing to a century or more of individual temperatures on a given date.
So these extreme events like record high temperatures also happen on the seasonal time scale. Just in the last few years, we've had what was called a marine heat wave in the waters south of Alaska, the Gulf of Alaska and the Bering Sea. But the water temperatures in that area set new records in 2015 and 2016.
And most Alaskans are acutely aware that big wildfire seasons are becoming more and more common, most recently in 2015, and the frequency of million-acre seasons has doubled since the early 1990s.
Just this past winter, we had another event in the Bering Sea. The ice extent in the Bering was lower than it had ever been in the last 150 years. That's about as far back as the good records go. There'd never been another year like this one in the Bering with so little sea ice. That had major impacts on the communities along the west coast and the northwest coast.
So, John, what have you been hearing from folks around town about these kind of climate extremes?
I've heard from a number of people who've been here a long time that winters just aren't what they used to be. The average temperatures are higher than they were back in the 1960s and 1970s, and we just don't get the extreme cold days, the days down in the minus 50s or even the minus 60s that we used to experience in Fairbanks back in the 1960s, 1970s, and even into the 1980s.
Well, and it's not just winter either. 2016 and 2017, the summers brought unusually muggy, humid weather to Fairbanks. We're not used to thinking of that in interior Alaska, but record high humidities during the summer months. As in the winter, we've had a significant increase in freezing rain events, since about 2000. So much so that DOT has changed their road treatment strategy, and now we have the school district building in winter rain days into the calendar. And of course, we all need good weather forecasts for these high impact weather events.
We know, though, that weather forecasts are sometimes wrong just 3 or 4 days in advance. So if these weather forecasts and the models they're based on can't pick up events like freezing rain 3 or 4 days ahead, how can we believe what they say about climate for the future?
Well, that's a really good question, John. And I think the important thing to remember is that parts of the system are predictable.
So climate models can't give you weather for particular days or even for particular months or years. They actually predict averages. These are averages over periods of a decade or two, or even averages over periods of several years. So they don't give us the month-to-month information that we might want. What are they telling us about the future, though?
Well, these climate models are telling us on the decades-long time frames that warmer winters are going to become more common. We're going to have more frequent, very low sea ice years with late freeze up and early meltout. And the same will be true on Alaskan rivers. We'll have more frequent seasons when freeze up is late and break up is early.
One of the other common threads in these climate model predictions is that heavy rain events and heavy snow events will become more common in the future. That's actually a prediction that the models make for mid-latitudes as well as for high latitudes in areas like Alaska. So we can expect the heavy downpours to become heavier and the heavy winter snows to become heavier than we've been used to. They're also predicting more frequent freezing rain events, getting back to what you talked about earlier. These events that might have happened just once every year or two in the past could actually end up happening several times in a winter in the future, according to the climate models.
And it is important to remember that even in a warming world, there are still going to be seasons and years that are colder than the average, but these cold seasons will become less and less common. So, John, maybe I don't need to have those bunny boots in my closet anymore?
Well, at least you won't need to wear them as often as you did in the past.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back, and looking at the sea ice. It's extensive throughout the north, down through the Bering Strait. As far as any really strong winds to move things around, not a whole lot coming up here, at least in the shorter term. Along areas, though, of the Bering and especially southwest coast, with the colder air that's been in place, we have seen some ice redevelop along the ice edge, and that may be the trend here, at least for another day or so. We are going to see a frontal system work its way across the Bering and push up into the southwestern coast, but the winds with that will not be excessive, though at least low-end gales potentially. For the Panhandle, inner channels, winds will be southerly on Monday, 15 knots, so there could be some gusts to 35 knots in Lynn Canal. Waves generally running 3-4 feet in the inner channels, 7 feet down toward Dixon Entrance. The outer coast winds will be south, turning southwesterly west of Gustavus, and southeasterly to easterly, rather, there toward west of Yakutat Bay, and waves running anywhere from 8 to 11 feet. And then on Tuesday, winds will be kind of a mix here across the inner channels, southerly 15 knots in Lynn Canal, but turning northerly 15 knots, Stevens Passage down through Ketchikan there at 20 knots, waves a few feet. And then the outer coast winds will generally be out of the north-northwest, 15 to 20 knots, with waves of 5 to perhaps as high as 8 feet just off of Craig. And then across the northwestern Gulf, strongest winds will be coming out of the entrance there of Cook Inlet, 45-knot gales with waves of 12 feet. Up here in Prince William Sound, winds will be southeast 15 knots with waves a few feet, and then south northeasterly winds to 30 knots along the Kenai coast with 7-foot waves. By Tuesday, winds will continue to come down further. Southeast 15 knots in Prince William Sound with waves 2-3 feet. Northeast winds 10 knots, upper Cook Inlet. And then southeasterly winds there at the entrance of Cook Inlet at 20 knots with waves of 4 to 5 feet. Across Kodiak Island on Monday, winds will be out of the northwest, 35 to 40-knot gales, waves 8 feet in Shelikof Strait, 10 feet off of AKwx. And then as this frontal boundary approaches, winds are going to be east and then turn back toward the south-southeast around 15 to 20 knots, waves 2 to 4 feet either side of the lower half of the Alaska Peninsula. And then on Tuesday, in the vicinity of Kodiak Island, winds will be south-southeast, as that front kind of works its way northeastward, and then behind it, southwest winds 20 to 25 knots with waves generally 3 to 6 feet on the North Pacific side and 4 to 8 feet there north of Cold Bay on the Bering side. And across the Aleutian chain on Monday, eastern Aleutians, central Aleutians, south winds around 25 knots. Veering southwesterly to 30-35 knots west of Adak. Waves generally 5 to 8 feet on the Bering side and 6 to 10 feet there through the central Aleutians on the North Pacific side. Across the region on Tuesday, winds will generally be out of the southwest, 25 knots across the eastern Aleutians, picking up to 30 knots from Atka westward. Waves generally 9 to 13 feet through the eastern and central Aleutians, and around 8-9 feet here on the Bering side, with higher waves in excess of 15 feet there in through the western Aleutians. Across the southwest, we're going to see winds northwesterly into Norton Sound, northerly along the Yukon Delta, and then offshore northeasterly winds 10 knots. Strongest winds, easterly winds 30 knots ahead of that front at St. Matthew. And then on Tuesday, winds are going to turn northeasterly and pick up out of Norton Sound and along the lower Yukon Delta at 25 knots. 30 knots in the vicinity of St. Matthew, and then southwest winds where the front comes in up here into Bristol Bay and on up into Kuskokwim Bay, southwest winds at 25 knots. Along the Arctic coast on Monday, winds will be westerly 10 to 15 knots. Westerly winds through the lower Chukchi Sea at about 10 knots, turning northerly south of the Bering Strait on the north side of St. Lawrence Island and within Norton Sound. And then for Tuesday, we expect southwest winds, especially from Point Lay all the way up toward Kaptovik, 15 to 20 knots. Winds will be out of the east-southeast and through the lower Chukchi Sea, 10 knots. And then once we get through the Bering Strait, look for northeasterly winds, 15 to 20 knots or so on the north side of St. Lawrence and in and out of Norton Sound. A quick check, low pressure along the Kenai coast at least this Sunday night will pivot out back further into the Gulf on Monday.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.